Hello my dear students, once again welcome back to your online class. So today in this video we'll be starting the second chapter of your physics textbook, and the chapter's name is force and pressure and as well as motion. So in this chapter, in the first part, we'll be discussing about the rest and motion and the different type of motion. So if you look into your book, so the chapter starts with the term the rest and motion. So now coming to the detailed study of what is rest and what is motion. So first we must know the state of a body. Okay, so we know that all the bodies, it is either of the one state. So the two, which are the first one being the rest and the second one is being the motion. Now what is rest and what is motion? Now if you look into the some of the things in your room, like a switchboard, like the position of your bulb in the room, so all of them, they are fixed. That means they do not change its position with respect to its surrounding. So hence they are said to be at rest. So a body is said to be at rest when it does not changes its position with respect to its surrounding. Now opposite to rest is known as motion. Like you may see a vehicle running on the road, or a motorbike, or even the mosquitoes in the house, or the house flies. So what do we observe? We observe that the position of those objects it does not remain stationary, or it does not remain the same with its surrounding object. So hence it is said to be in motion. So we may say that whenever the body's position changes with respect to the surrounding, then the body is said to be in motion. So now after you know what is rest and motion, so you also must know that the rest and motion, they are said to be the relative terms. Now why relative terms? It is because it depends upon the observer who is viewing that object. Like the same object may be at rest for you, and for me maybe it is in motion. Like for example, like somebody or two person, you and your friend sitting inside a bus. Okay, and then when you observe your friend inside the bus which is moving, so what do you see? You will see your friend at rest, that is as stationary. But the third friend who is outside the bus, okay, when he sees the same person, he will see it in a motion. Okay, so the same person for you is at rest, and for the other person who is outside the bus is in motion. So that means the rest and motion, it depends upon the observer who is viewing at the object. So hence the rest and motion are terms as relative term. So now coming to the different types of motion. So here I have written down the 10 different kinds of motion, which you may see in your book as well with the example also. So let us start with the first kind of motion, which is a rectilinear motion. So a motion is said to be a rectilinear if it moves in a straight line. Okay, for example, a vehicle moving in a straight line, or train moving in a straight track. So any object which moves in a straight line is said to be have a rectilinear motion. Now the second, coming to the curvilinear. So you must have observed that whenever we ride a vehicle, or whenever we are in a bicycle, we just don't go in a straight line. Sometimes we go through the curve also. So whenever a body passes through such curves, then the motion is said to be a curvilinear motion. For example, a train bending in a curve, or a bus taking a turn, or a motorbike taking a turn on a road. So what is a curvilinear motion? So whenever a body moves in a curved line, then it is said to be a curvilinear motion. Now coming to the third one, the circular motion. Now what is a circular motion? You must have noticed that in certain racing tracks, the racing tracks are circular in shape, and then the vehicle constantly moves in a circular path. So such motions are said to be a circular motion. Now coming to the fourth one, the revolving motion. So the revolving motion, for example, is like the motion of the earth around the sun. So if it moves in a circular path, or if it revolves around a certain object, then the motion is said to be a revolving motion. Then the fifth comes a rotational motion, like the earth rotates on its axis. So if any object rotates about a fixed point, then it is said to be a rotational motion. For example, the rotation of earth. Now coming to the sixth one, oscillatory motion. So what is oscillatory motion? Oscillatory motion and almost the vibratory motion, it almost means the same. So whenever a body moves, like it oscillates to and fro, it is said to be the oscillatory motion. For example, a pendulum. Now if you don't understand what is a pendulum, if you tie a string and a stone, and then if you let it move, what happens? It oscillates. So such motions are said to be the oscillatory motion. So is the vibratory motion. For example, a vibratory motion is when you hold a scale and pluck at one of the end. What happens? It vibrates to and fro. So such kind of motions are said to be the vibratory motion. Now repetitive motion are the motion which repeats at a regular interval of time. Like for example, playing of a tabla. Okay, so what does the musician do? He beats the tabla at a repetitive manner. So such motions are said to be the repetitive. And finally, the 9th and the 10th, they are the periodic and the non-periodic motion. So periodic motions are the one which occurs at a regular interval of time. Like for the rising of the sun rises every morning. Or like your first period, okay, every day the first period your class teacher takes. So such a motions which occurs after a certain interval of time, that means which occurs periodically, are said to be the periodic motion. And finally, last we have is the non-periodic motion. So just the opposite of the periodic, the non-periodic is the one which does not occur at a regular interval of time, like for a rainfall. Okay, so what happens? You never know when it rains. So non-periodic motions are the one which does not occur at a regular interval of time. So these are the 10 different kinds of motion mentioned in your book. So dear students, please go through these motions, like the definition of each of them and also the example. So now the next important topic in your book is the study of a simple pendulum. Now coming to the point, what is a simple pendulum? So as I have already mentioned, a simple pendulum is nothing so complicated, but it's simply a heavy bob suspended with the help of an inextensible thread. Like if I have a base here, okay, like if this is the top of your room ceiling, and then you suspend one heavy ball, okay, which is usually known as a bob. Okay, so this arrangement itself is known as a simple pendulum. Now when it comes to the simple pendulum, there are some of the important terms related to it. So now when this simple pendulum or this bob is in rest, okay, so it hangs vertically downward, and this is known as the mean position. And then when you slightly displace it, what happens? It goes to one of the highest part, and then again it comes back to A, and after coming to A, it goes back to the another side, which is at C. Okay, so these B and C are known as the extreme position. Okay, so extreme position is the highest point where the bob reaches. So now first comes the amplitude. Now what is the amplitude now? Now we see that when the ball, it goes from the position A to B, it have to cross every point between A and B. But what is the highest distance of the bob from the mean position? So it is at B, or it is also at C. Okay, so this maximum displacement of the bob is known as the amplitude. So you may simply define the amplitude is the maximum displacement of a particle or of a body from its mean position. So now coming to the second one, oscillation. Now what is oscillation? So the oscillation is simply the to and fro movement of a body is known as a oscillation. So oscillation means, if I say one oscillation, it means a body at A, it goes to B, again comes back to A, it goes to C, and then it comes back to the A. So that is known as a oscillation. Then the third one we can have is the frequency. Now what is the frequency? Now frequency is the number of complete oscillations made in 1 second. Suppose in 1 second if it goes to and fro 2 times, then I say the frequency is 2. Now the third one is, the fourth one is the time period. Now what is the time period? Now the time period is the time taken by the bob to complete one oscillation. Suppose if this bob takes 2 seconds to go from A to B, from B to A to C, and C to A. Okay, then the time period is said to be the 2 seconds. So now there exists a relation between a frequency and a time period. So it is seen that the frequency, suppose if the frequency is given by f and the time period is given by t, then the time period and frequency, they are inversely related. That is, f is equals to 1 divided by t. So this gives the relationship between the frequency and the time period. So these are some of the important point or important terms related to the simple pendulum. So now coming to the factors that affect the time period with simple pendulum. Okay, so there are certain factors which affect the time period. So what is it? So the first factor that affects the time period of the pendulum is the length of the pendulum. So what is the length of the pendulum? Now the length of the pendulum is the length of the string plus the radius of the bob is known as the length of the pendulum. So the first one, the time period, is directly proportional to the length of the pendulum. So that means the longer is the thread, the more time it will require to make one oscillation. So first one is the length. So apart from the length of the pendulum, there is no other factor on which the time period of the pendulum depends. For example, the material of the bob, the mass of the bob, okay, so on those factors it does not depend. So only one of the factor on which the time period of the pendulum depend is the length of the pendulum. So which you will find in details in your book. So I ask you to please go through your books and understand this concept more properly. So in the next class we will be discussing on the velocity and the speed, okay, acceleration and retardation and weight and the mass. So one more video and then I'll end up with this chapter. So if you have any problem in understanding today's video, please you are free to ask me in my WhatsApp number. Thank you.